She walked through the wet alleys, searching for scraps of survival where others saw only trash. But that night, Ivy didn't find just aluminum and cardboard. She found a man unconscious, dressed like someone from another world, discarded as if he meant nothing. He didn't speak. He didn't remember who he was, but there was something in his eyes that neither time nor pain could erase, an ancient sadness and a rich soul. But what happened next? No one there could have imagined. If this story touches you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Your presence is what keeps this mission alive and filled with stories that warm the heart. The rain had a way of making everything glisten in New Camden, even the garbage. Beneath the dim, flickering light of a broken lamppost, Ivy pushed her cart through the alley, its wheels creaking under the weight of plastic bottles and torn cardboard. Her boots squelched through muddy puddles as the cold bit into her skin. But she was used to this, to the wet, the dark, the forgotten edges of the city where no one looked twice. She paused near a rusted dumpster, instinct pulling her attention away from the bag of cans she'd spotted. There was a shape, barely visible, slumped against the bricks, half concealed by soaked newspapers and the shadows of the alley wall. At first, she thought it was just another homeless man. New Camden had plenty, but something about the figure didn't fit. Not the posture, not the stillness. She moved closer, cautiously, her fingers tightening around the handle of her cart. The man was unconscious. His head leaned to the side, strands of dark, rain-slicked hair plastered to his pale forehead. A bruise bloomed along his jawline. His coat, expensive, even under the dirt and blood, clung to his body like it had never been meant for a night like this. And there on his hand was a platinum ring set with a black stone that seemed to shimmer even in the half-light. Ivy's heart knocked against her ribs. She glanced around. No one. Just the drizzle. Just the sound of her own breath, ragged in the cold. "Hey," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" No answer. His chest rose barely. He was alive, but fading fast. She should have walked away. She'd been warned enough times, don't get involved, don't bring trouble home. But something about him, the way his lips were parted as if caught in the middle of an unfinished thought, the way his hand loosely gripped nothing but air, cracked open a door in her heart she thought she had sealed long ago. Ivy dropped her coat over his chest, shivering instantly as the rain kissed her thin sweater. "You're not dying in this alley," she muttered, as much to herself as to him. Not tonight. It took everything she had to pull him into the cart. The weight of him made it nearly impossible to move, but she pushed with everything her spine could give. Her body ached, her arms trembled, but the wheels finally turned. The alley gave way to a narrower path, one only Ivy knew, shortcuts between forgotten buildings and fences sagging with rot. By the time she reached her makeshift shelter, a corrugated metal shack pressed against the wall of an abandoned storage facility, her body was numb with exhaustion. She slid the door aside and maneuvered him inside, laying him gently on the pile of old blankets she called a bed. The air smelled of rust and rain and old wood. Her fingers trembled as she lit the single oil lamp, casting a flickering glow over his face. There was blood on his temple. She wiped it away carefully with a damp cloth, wincing at the gash beneath. Her supplies were limited, but she knew how to clean wounds. She'd had to learn over the years. Life didn't wait for hospitals when you lived in the shadows of cities. He groaned once, low, pained. "Shh," she whispered. "You're safe now." She didn't know why she said it, didn't know if it was even true, but in that moment, as the rain drummed softly against the metal roof, Ivy realized something terrifying. She wanted him to be safe. For hours she stayed beside him, feeding him drops of water, brushing dirt from his hair, adjusting the damp blankets around his body. The cold pressed in on them both, but Ivy lit a second candle and boiled a small pot of broth, the last of what she had. When he stirred again, his eyes fluttering open, they were unfocused and full of something between fear and confusion. "You're okay," Ivy said softly. "Where?" he croaked. "You don't remember?" He shook his head. Barely. His gaze searched the room like it was the first time he'd ever seen one. "I found you," she added, trying to make her voice steady. "You were hurt, out cold, in the alley. The man tried to sit up and winced, falling back with a grunt of pain. "You need to rest," she said quickly. "You've got a head wound, and probably a couple of broken ribs too." He looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them, a moment of silent understanding. He didn't know who he was. She didn't know who he used to be, but right now in this fragile present they were both just here. She sat down beside him, drawing her knees up to her chest. The silence stretched between them, soft and raw. "I need a name," she murmured after a while. The man blinked, puzzled. "I can't keep calling you hey you." She smiled faintly, then added, "When I was little I used to read this old book about a boy who went on adventures, who always helped people, even when he was scared. His name was Elliot." A pause, then, "Can I call you that until you remember who you are?" The man, Elliot, hesitated, then nodded, slowly. "Elliot," she said again, testing the name on her tongue. "It suits you." He closed his eyes, the tension in his shoulders softening just enough for her to breathe a little easier. Ivy pulled a blanket over both of them and leaned against the wall, the rain still whispering outside. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that for the first time in a long time she didn't feel alone. And beside her, the man called Elliot slept, the ring on his finger catching the glow of the candle as if holding a secret, waiting to be told. The shack was nothing more than 4 patched-up walls and a rusted sheet of metal pretending to be a roof. But to Ivy, it was the closest thing to home. She had found it years ago behind an abandoned shipping facility, tucked where no one cared to look. Inside, the air always smelled of damp wood, burnt candle wax, and the quiet persistence of survival. Now, for the first time, someone else breathed there with her. The man, the stranger with the bruised temple and the platinum ring, still lay motionless on the makeshift bed made of torn blankets and flattened cardboard. His coat hung nearby, drying over a broken chair. His shoes, far too expensive for the ground they had touched, sat by the door caked with mud. Ivy hovered near him like a quiet shadow. She had cleaned the blood from his face, dabbed the gash on his temple with vinegar and cloth, wrapped his ribs with strips of an old t-shirt. She had even given him her last bowl of broth, barely tasting it herself. Each movement had been careful, each breath cautious. She had no idea who he was, if he was dangerous or a ghost from some rich man's nightmare. But none of that seemed to matter the way it should have. Not when he lay there like that, half alive, half lost, his hands twitching in sleep as if haunted by things his memory refused to surrender. Hours passed. The rain softened outside, becoming a hush instead of a scream. Ivy leaned against the wall, hugging her knees, watching him. She'd spent her whole life navigating people, watching from a distance, judging quickly, silently, because silence had always been safer than asking. But there was something about this man that made her stay. Something about the stillness he brought into the room. Not just fear or mystery. Something softer. He stirred. His eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes that were a stormy grey. Clouded, searching, uncertain. "Hey," Ivy whispered. Her voice felt foreign in the small space, like it didn't belong. "You're awake." The man blinked slowly, then tried to sit up. A sharp inhale escaped his lips as pain halted the motion. "Easy," she said quickly, moving toward him. "You hit your head, and your ribs. They're not doing so great either." He looked at her with furrowed brows, confusion bleeding into fear. "Where am I?" "You're safe," Ivy said, and meant it. His gaze scanned the room. "I don't remember anything." "Not even your name?" A pause. He shook his head, once, stiffly. Ivy let out a breath. "You don't have anything on you? No ID, no phone, just that ring?" She nodded toward the table where it sat, next to the scraps of her dinner. "Looks expensive. Like you are, or were, someone important." He didn't answer. Just stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched like he was trying to hold something inside. She could have asked more, could have grilled him, demanded an explanation he clearly didn't have. But Ivy knew the weight of silence. Sometimes it was the only shield left. Instead, she crouched beside him and offered a crooked, shy smile. "I used to read this book when I was little, about a boy named Elliot. He got lost, like you, but he always found his way back, even when everyone else gave up on him. The man looked at her. "So," she continued softly, "until you remember who you are, can I call you Elliot?" His lips parted slightly, as if tasting the name. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right then, Elliot," she whispered. That night, something unspoken settled between them. Not trust, not yet, but a fragile thread of recognition. As if, in their quiet wounds, they'd found a strange kind of mirror. Ivy rearranged the blankets, making sure Elliot was warm, then lit a second candle to chase the shadows off the walls. She didn't ask why her chest felt tight when his eyes closed again. She didn't ask why she stayed seated beside him long after he'd fallen asleep. In the days that followed, a rhythm began to form. Elliot barely spoke, but he listened. He watched. He'd wake to find Ivy sorting through bags of recyclables, her hands always moving, her brow always furrowed. She taught him how to light the old stove without burning himself. He would stand nearby as she hung wet clothes on wires strung across the ceiling. Their hands would brush sometimes. Neither pulled away. She noticed things, how he always sat upright with perfect posture, like his body had been trained for boardrooms, not back alleys. How he'd touch his left wrist at times, as if expecting a watch that wasn't there. How he never flinched when she was near, as if her presence calmed something restless inside him. He noticed things too, the way she always offered him the larger half of any meal, even when her stomach growled. The way she stared at books she no longer had time to read. The way she whispered to herself while sorting cans, as if narrating a story only she could hear. They didn't talk much, but their silence was never empty. At night the rain came and went. Sometimes Ivy would drift off with her head resting on her knees, and Elliot would stay awake, watching her, the curve of her face in candlelight, the tired elegance in the way she breathed. And in those moments flashes would come. A tall building, a voice screaming, the scent of whiskey, a hand reaching for him. Or was it pushing? Each time he'd jolt upright, heart racing. And each time Ivy would stir, reach out, place a gentle hand on his shoulder. No questions, just presence. One evening, as the sunset filtered through a crack in the wall, Ivy handed Elliot a cracked cup filled with warm tea. "You're healing," she said, watching him sip. "I don't know who I was," he murmured, "but I know I feel different, like I'm starting from scratch." She nodded. "Maybe that's not the worst thing." He looked at her, eyes searching. "Why are you helping me?" Ivy shrugged, but her voice was steady. "Because someone should. And because when I found you, you looked like you'd been thrown away. I know what that feels like." Their eyes locked. The silence returned. But it wasn't empty. It was the kind that filled a room with something unnamed, the kind that made hearts stutter, hands tremble. And in the soft flicker of the candlelight, Elliot reached out, just enough to brush her fingers. Neither of them spoke, but neither of them pulled away. The rain had passed, leaving behind the scent of wet asphalt and fresh soil. Puddles shimmered like forgotten mirrors in the alleyways of New Camden, but inside Ivy's modest shack, the world felt strangely still. The rhythm between her and Elliot had grown quiet but sure, like the breathing of two people learning to exist side by side without asking too much. He had begun helping with small things, tidying up their space, folding blankets, adjusting the crooked legs of the rickety table with surprising ease. Ivy didn't comment on it, not at first, but she noticed. One afternoon, while Ivy was out salvaging recyclables, Elliot found an old broken fan shoved beneath a pile of crates. It was rusted, wires exposed, and the blades jammed by years of dust and neglect. He stared at it for a long time, as if his fingers remembered something his mind did not. When Ivy returned, her hands red from the cold and her cart only half full, she paused in the doorway. The fan was humming softly. She blinked. "How did you—" Elliot looked up, surprised by the question. "I'm not sure," he said. "I just knew what to do." He didn't say it with arrogance or pride. There was no smirk, no self-congratulation. Only quiet curiosity, like a child solving a puzzle for the first time. She stepped closer, examining the work. The motor had been cleaned, the wires soldered, carefully, with the tip of a heated metal rod from the fire stove. It didn't make sense. Ivy didn't even have tools, yet somehow Elliot had made it work. It wasn't the first time. Earlier that week, the radio, silent for months, had started playing again after he spent half an hour fiddling with its insides. The creaking door to the shack no longer screamed in protest. A metal latch now held it steady. Even the oil lamp burned steadier under his touch, the wick trimmed just right. "How do you know all this?" Ivy asked one evening as she watched him craft a handle for her cart out of an old pipe and cloth. "You don't remember anything, but your hands, they remember everything." He looked down at them, strong, clean despite the grime, knuckles marked with faint calluses. "Maybe it's muscle memory," he murmured, "or maybe it's just who I am." She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You ever wonder what kind of life you had before all this?" "All the time," he said. Ivy had been wondering too, more than she admitted. It wasn't just the skills or the posture, always straight, composed, like someone who had spent years in rooms where appearances mattered. It was the details, the fine wool of his coat, even after all it had been through. The stitching inside bore initials, MC, and there was the tattoo, barely visible beneath the cuff of his shirt, an emblem of two interlocking crescents, etched near his wrist with perfect symmetry. It didn't look like something from the street. Then there was the ring. She'd placed it on the shelf, unsure why she hadn't pawned it. The platinum band was heavy, thick, holding a black stone that shimmered blue under candlelight. Ivy had never seen anything like it. Around the inside, faint letters were engraved. ALT 1 of 2. 1 of 2. Sometimes when Elliot stared into space, Ivy imagined what he might be seeing. Boardrooms, ballrooms, private jets, or just memories too broken to take shape. But whatever his past was, it didn't change how he acted in the present. Elliot never raised his voice. He never recoiled from dirt or chores or cold nights with little food. He treated her with a kind of reverence Ivy had never known. Not the kind that put her on a pedestal, but the kind that saw her. All of her. The bruises behind her eyes, the calluses on her hands, the stories she never told. One evening, as they sat near the small fire, Ivy offered him half a sweet potato she'd roasted over the flames. He took it gently. "You didn't have to share this." She shrugged. "You didn't have to fix the radio." He smiled. A real one. It was soft at the edges, like he was still learning how. "I don't know who I was," he said, voice low, "but I'm starting to realize I might not want to be him again." Ivy tilted her head. "Why not?" He stared into the fire. "Because whoever I was, he had everything. And he still ended up in a trash pile." The words sank deep into the air between them. Ivy reached across the blanket and brushed her hand against his. "Maybe that version of you had money," she said, "but this one has something better." He looked up, confused. "You have peace now," she added, "and maybe even a friend." His expression changed. Not quite shock. Something gentler. Something that bloomed behind his eyes. They sat in silence, listening to the wood crackle. Outside, the wind carried the sounds of a distant siren. But inside their little world, everything felt warm. Still. Later that night, Ivy lay awake, staring at the roof where moonlight slipped through the cracks. She listened to Elliot's breathing, calm, steady. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to run from the morning. But sleep didn't come easy, because beneath the comfort of what they had built, questions still gnawed at the edges of her thoughts. Who was he? What was that emblem? Who owned the other ring? And perhaps the hardest question of all, what would happen when he finally remembered everything? The streets of New Camden weren't made for tenderness. They cracked beneath the weight of despair, echoed with sirens and hurried footsteps, and smelled of metal, oil, and forgotten stories. But for Ivy, they were familiar, predictable. She knew which corners offered the best scrap, which dumpsters had the cleanest recyclables, and which security guards looked the other way when she passed. Elliot didn't belong in that world. Not with his quiet grace, not with the way he looked at the sky as if he expected it to remember him. But he insisted. Every morning, before Ivy even said a word, he was already pulling on the patched coat she'd found him, ready to follow. No matter how many times she reminded him that it wasn't safe, that it was hard, that it would make his hands bleed, he would smile and reply the same way. "Then we'll bleed together." It startled her, that choice. People usually walked away from her. Elliot walked beside her. They moved through alleys together now, Ivy pushing the cart, Elliot pulling the bags. She taught him how to spot aluminum by the sound it made when crushed, how to fold cardboard to fit 3 times as much, how to charm the bakery owner into parting with stale bread by complimenting his daughter's cat. He learned fast. More than that, he laughed. Sometimes it was just a soft exhale through his nose, the trace of amusement flickering across his face. But one afternoon, as Ivy mimicked the posh accent of a man who'd yelled at them for sorting near his luxury building, Elliot actually laughed. A deep, full laugh that surprised even him. Ivy turned sharply. "Was that a laugh, Elliot?" He shrugged, wiping his eyes. "Apparently, I still remember how." That night, she found herself grinning in the dark long after they had returned to the shack. She didn't know why his laughter mattered so much, only that it had landed somewhere inside her, like a stone in still water. In time, they built a rhythm, one that had nothing to do with memories or past lives or missing identities. It was built on gestures, shared bread, split earnings, silent understanding. Elliot took pride in his role, not just as a helper but as her equal. He carried weight without complaint, listened without interruption, and never, not once, made Ivy feel less for the life she led. And she noticed that. She noticed the way he waited for her to eat first, the way he stood a little closer when men on the street stared too long, the way his eyes softened every time she winced from the cold. It was under the overpass on 5th Avenue where something shifted. They had just sold a load of recyclables to a yard that paid pennies but didn't ask questions. Ivy had sat down beneath a tree near the lot, exhausted, her hands raw. Elliot knelt beside her, his fingers brushing hers before she could pull away. "You okay?" he asked. She wanted to say yes. Instead, she said, "You don't have to keep coming with me." "I know," he replied. "Then why do you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "Because it's the only time I feel real." Ivy turned her head to look at him. "What does that mean?" "I don't know who I was," he said. "But when I'm out there with you, I feel like someone I'd want to be." The words fell into her chest like a confession. They sat in silence after that, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. Nearby, a dog barked, a car honked, life moved on. But under that tree, between 2 people who had lost more than they could name, something new had taken root. That evening, they passed a street musician playing a melancholic tune on a battered violin. Ivy stopped. Elliot did too. She closed her eyes, letting the notes wash over her, raw and slow and aching. And when she opened them again, Elliot was watching her, not just her face, but her, as if he'd never seen anything so honest. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Later that night, Ivy placed a second pillow beside her own for the first time. She didn't mention it, neither did he. They simply lay down side by side, the air between them heavy with unspoken truths and breath they didn't know they were holding. When she closed her eyes, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. She didn't feel alone anymore. The next morning, the routine continued. They passed by a schoolyard, the sound of children laughing spilling into the street. Ivy hesitated, her gaze locked on the swings. Elliot followed her eyes. "You okay?" "That used to be my dream," she said. "To teach." He waited, patient. "But dreams don't survive out here. They rust, like everything else." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Not all of them." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. But later, when they returned home, she found a book on the bed, one she thought she had lost, about the boy named Elliot, who always found his way home. She looked up at him, her throat tight. He just smiled. That night, as they sat by the fire, their hands brushing more often than not, Ivy leaned her head against his shoulder. Just for a second. And Elliot, without a word, rested his head gently against hers. In the flickering light, the shadows on the wall danced, not in chaos, but in quiet harmony, like 2 lives once broken, finally learning the rhythm of something whole. But even as warmth settled around them, Ivy couldn't stop the question forming in her mind. What happens when his past finally finds him and takes him back? The night was unusually still. No sirens, no wind. Just the distant sound of dripping water from a cracked gutter and the gentle crackle of the fire in the corner. Inside the shack, Ivy and Elliot sat close, their knees touching under the blanket they now shared without pretense. They hadn't spoken much since returning that evening. There was no need. Some days didn't require words, only presence, but tonight the silence between them was charged with something unspoken, something shifting. Ivy turned slightly, her eyes searching his face in the flickering light. "You always look like you're trying to remember a dream you lost." Elliot blinked, caught off guard. "Do I?" She nodded. "Even when you smile, there's this distance, like your soul is somewhere your body hasn't caught up to." He exhaled, lowering his gaze. "Maybe it is." A pause settled between them. Ivy reached up, brushing a damp strand of hair away from his forehead. Her hand lingered, and for once he didn't pull away. "You don't have to be anyone," she whispered. "Not here, not with me." The way she said it, quiet, unguarded, unraveled something inside him. "Ivy," he began, voice catching. She waited. "I don't know who I used to be, but this version of me, the one you call Elliot, feels more real than anything else ever has." His words trembled in the air like glass on the edge of a shelf. Ivy smiled, soft and broken. "Then stay." He hesitated only for a second, then leaned in. Their lips met in the faintest of kisses, hesitant, reverent. Not a conquest, not a promise, just two people acknowledging that in a world full of wreckage, they had found something unexplainably whole in each other. But the moment didn't last, because the kiss opened a door, and behind that door, memories had been waiting. It started with a name. Michael. Elliot stiffened, his breath caught in his chest. Then came a flash. A glass-walled boardroom, sunlight pouring over sleek black furniture. A man's voice sharp, cold, shouting accusations. The clink of a whiskey glass shattering against marble. A signature in gold ink. Betrayal. His heart pounded. His hands began to shake. "Ivy," he whispered, eyes wide. I think I remembered something." She pulled back, alarmed. "What is it?" "I saw a building, a name, Caldwell, and someone called me Michael." Ivy froze. "Michael?" His breathing grew uneven. There was a man. My brother, maybe. He was yelling. And then, pain. Lights. Sirens. He swallowed. "I think someone tried to kill me." The words landed like thunder between them. He stood suddenly, pacing the small space. "It's like pieces are coming back all at once, and they don't belong here." Ivy rose slowly. "Michael." "Caldwell?" she repeated. He nodded. "I think that's my real name." The room dimmed as the candlelight flickered low. Ivy tried to steady herself, but her body felt hollow. She had known, deep down, that he was never truly hers. That the ring, the clothes, the way he moved, they all pointed to another world, one far from hers. But hearing it, the confirmation, was something else entirely. She watched him, this man who had once slept beside garbage, now pacing like a storm had broken loose inside him. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, grief etched in every line of his face. "It means I'm not Elliot, not really. I'm Michael Caldwell, CEO, probably. And someone tried to destroy me. Maybe they still want to." "Then stay," she said, desperate. "Let it go. Whoever you were. Maybe it doesn't matter now." Michael shook his head. "It does matter. Because whoever I was, they'll come for me. Or worse, come for you." She flinched. "I can't stay here, Ivy. I wish I could. But I have to face this." He looked at her, really looked, like he was memorizing her face one last time. That night they didn't sleep. They lay beside each other in silence, her head on his chest, his fingers tangled in her hair. He didn't say goodbye. Neither did she, because the ache of what was coming was already louder than any word could offer. Before dawn, while she was still asleep, Michael sat at the wooden crate they used as a table and scribbled a letter. Each word cost him something. "I don't know where I'm going or who I'll be when I arrive, but you gave me a name when I had none, a home when I had nowhere to fall. You taught me that I didn't need power to be worthy of love. I hope one day you'll understand why I left before the sun came up, But if I don't come back, know this. In the silence, you became everything." He folded the note, placed it on her pillow, and set the platinum ring beside it. Then he slipped out into the fading darkness, the cold biting through his coat. By the time Ivy stirred, sunlight had begun to paint the wall a dull orange. She reached beside her, expecting warmth, the weight of his body. Nothing. She sat up, blinking, then saw the note, saw the ring. Her heart dropped into silence. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. As she read, and when it ended, she didn't cry. She simply stood, walked to the door, opened it, and stared at the city that had always tried to take everything from her. This time it had taken her heart. But as the wind touched her skin, she whispered the only truth she had left. "Elliot, or Michael, come back to me." And in the distance, beyond the rooftops of New Camden, the sky churned. Like a storm was finally ready to return. 2 months. That was how long the silence had stretched since the morning Ivy woke up to find a letter in place of the man she had loved. The city hadn't changed. The streets were still loud and bruised. The alleys still smelled of gasoline and rain. People still rushed past her without seeing her, as if she were part of the city's debris. But something in Ivy had shifted, something vital, something tender. Michael was gone. No explanation beyond a note, no promise to return. And she hated that part of her still clung to the hope that he might. Every morning she woke up, lit the fire, and stared at the spot where he used to sleep. Her fingers still brushed the blanket he'd folded the night before he vanished. She still checked the street outside before pushing her cart onto the sidewalks of New Camden. He had said he remembered who he was, but he hadn't said if he remembered her. The days blurred. Ivy went back to sorting through garbage, collecting metal, trading bottles for pennies. She learned to be invisible again, but inside, a storm raged, quiet and cruel. Then came the morning that changed everything. It had rained the night before, and the streets still glistened with puddles and broken reflections. Ivy was pushing her cart uphill, arms aching, when she passed the corner of Grant and Madison, a place she usually avoided. There in the front window of a dusty pawn shop, a television flickered. The glass was streaked, the volume low, but the image, it stopped her in her tracks. A man stood behind a sleek podium. Black suit, clean-shaven, hair neatly styled. The emblem of a rising phoenix gleamed behind him on a massive screen. Cameras flashed, people applauded, but Ivy didn't hear any of it. Because it was him, Michael, her Elliot. He was alive. He looked stronger, more commanding, but the tilt of his jaw, the shadow of softness in his eyes, the faint scar on his temple, it was him. The caption beneath the screen read, "Michael Caldwell returns as CEO of Caldwell International after mysterious absence." Ivy stepped closer to the glass, her breath fogging it. He was speaking, calm, charismatic. Words flowed from his mouth like they belonged to him. Economic forecasts, company vision, restructuring plans. He spoke of leadership and legacy, of resilience and innovation. But not once. Not once did he mention the time he disappeared. Not once did he mention her, not even a hint. It felt like watching a stranger with his face. She stared, transfixed, as he smiled politely at a reporter, as he nodded to his board members, as he shook hands with people dressed in wealth. And in that moment, a truth sharper than any blade cut through her. He had returned to his world and left hers behind. Ivy stepped back from the window. Her chest felt hollow. Her lungs forgot how to breathe. The man who had shared her fire, her silence, her first kiss, her world made of scraps and bruises. He now stood in marble halls under chandeliers, wearing suits tailored for empires, wearing the same ring he'd left beside her pillow. Her heart shattered in silence. A part of her had always known he would leave, but she had believed, foolishly, stubbornly, that he would look back. He hadn't. And now she was just another forgotten chapter in the book of a man who lived many lives. She stood frozen on the sidewalk as people brushed past her. No one noticed the tears welling in her eyes. No one saw the way her hands trembled, gripping the handle of her cart like it was the only thing holding her upright. She turned away from the glass. started walking again. But something had changed. She no longer pushed the cart to survive. She pushed it to keep from collapsing. That evening she sat by the fire alone. The shack felt colder, the air heavier. She took out the note he'd left her, worn from the number of times she'd unfolded it. "If I don't come back, know this. In the silence, you became everything." The words that once felt sacred now tasted bitter. Was it all a lie? Had he just used her as a safe place to heal before stepping back into the life he truly wanted? Had he felt anything real? Or had she imagined it all, like a foolish girl clinging to a man who never belonged to her? Ivy stared at the fire until it died. She didn't cry. Not that night. She couldn't. But as she lay awake, the memory of his kiss burned on her lips, and the whisper of his breath in the dark haunted her like a ghost that refused to leave. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to erase him from her veins. But love doesn't vanish just because it's abandoned. It lingers. It waits. And somewhere deep in that ache, a seed of something dangerous began to grow. Not hope. Not yet. But a need. A need to understand why he left. And if the man who stood behind that podium still remembered the girl who gave him a name when he had none. The invitation arrived folded neatly inside a cream-colored envelope. There was no return address. Just her name, handwritten in black ink, and the weight of a decision she never thought she'd have to make again. Ivy stared at it for hours before she opened it. Inside was a formal letter, printed on Caldwell International letterhead, requesting her presence at an upcoming executive recruitment meeting. No explanations, no personal note. Just a line at the bottom in cursive script. "Come if you're ready to stop surviving and start becoming. MC. Michael." 2 months of silence. 2 months of not knowing whether their time together had meant anything. And now this. He hadn't called, hadn't come back to the alley, hadn't knocked on the door of the shack where she still kept the blanket they once shared. But here he was, not as Elliot, not as the man who kissed her in the quiet, but as the CEO offering her a job. She should have thrown it away. Instead, she went. The Caldwell building loomed above the skyline like a monument to ambition. All glass and steel and silence, it didn't welcome people like her. People who knew the sting of cold floors and meals skipped. Ivy walked through the revolving doors with shoulders squared, her thrift store blazer crisp despite its frayed cuffs. The receptionist didn't ask for her name, she was expected. They led her to the 27th floor, executive offices. Everything smelled of polished wood and quiet money. Every step echoed. When the elevator doors opened, he was waiting. Michael. No suit this time, not completely. He wore dark slacks and a rolled-up white shirt, sleeves pushed to his elbows. The watch on his wrist caught the light, but it was his eyes that held her, still grey, still unreadable. "Hi," he said softly. Ivy didn't move. "You sent for me like I'm a problem you're trying to solve." His jaw tightened for a second, then relaxed. "I didn't know another way to reach you. You could have started with an apology." "I could have," he admitted, "but I thought it might mean more if I offered you something instead." "A job?" Her tone was sharp. He nodded. "Executive assistant. Full salary, full benefits, clean contract, no strings." "No strings," she repeated flatly. "I know I hurt you," he added, "but I also know how brilliant you are. You don't belong in the shadows, you never did." She looked past him to the office behind the glass, sleek, silent, and completely foreign. "You left me," she said, voice low. "You left without a word. And now you want me to help color-code your meetings." Michael took a breath. "I left because I didn't know who I was. I still don't know everything. But I know I trust you. I always did." Ivy crossed her arms. "Then let me be clear. If I take this job, it's only that, a job. No past, no feelings, no shared memories." His expression didn't change, but something in his posture wilted. "Understood," he said. And just like that, she said yes. Working at Caldwell International was like stepping into another life. Ivy moved through marble floors and glass-walled conference rooms with a calm she didn't feel. She organized calendars, answered emails, coordinated investor calls, and tracked down files faster than anyone expected. Her street-learned instincts made her precise, efficient, and impossible to intimidate. Everyone admired her. No one knew who she was. Except Michael. He kept his distance in public. They spoke in clipped tones, exchanged reports like strangers. But behind closed doors, the air always thickened. Their offices were connected by a private hallway, a quiet corridor of polished wood and tension. Sometimes they crossed paths in it by accident, sometimes not by accident at all. And every time they did, something unspoken passed between them. A glance, a breath, a memory, but never words. He'd changed. There was a new heaviness in his shoulders, a controlled restraint in his smile. But sometimes, when no one was watching, Ivy caught him looking at her the way he used to, like he saw more than she wanted him to. One evening, after a long meeting, Ivy stayed late to finalize a report. She sat at her desk, glasses perched on her nose, typing furiously. The office was quiet, most employees gone. A soft knock broke the silence. She looked up. Michael stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. "I remembered," he said. "You like mint." She stared at the cup but didn't take it. "We said no personal gestures." He nodded, setting the cup gently on the edge of her desk anyway. "Right, just stay hydrated. Long hours." He turned to leave. "Michael," she said before she could stop herself. He paused. She swallowed. "Why me?" He turned slowly, eyes darker than before. "Because when I had nothing, not even my name, you gave me dignity. And now that I have everything again, I realize you're the only part I miss." Ivy stood up too fast, her heart thudding. "This is work," she said, her voice sharper than she meant. "Don't make it more." He nodded once, the ache in his eyes unmistakable. "Good night, Ivy." She watched him go, the cup of tea still untouched on her desk, the warmth of it seeping slowly into her bones. Later that night, in the solitude of her small apartment, Ivy sat on the edge of her bed and whispered to no one, "If you miss me, why does it still feel like I'm the only one fighting to forget?" But she already knew the answer. Some loves don't leave scars, they leave echoes. And in every corner of that building she could still hear his. Marcus Caldwell had always been the type to smile while setting a house on fire. Confident, polished, and merciless beneath the charm. He was older than Michael by 6 years, yet somehow always in his shadow. And that he never forgave. When Michael vanished for months after the so-called incident, Marcus had tasted power for the first time. He had taken the reins of Caldwell International with a smile and a promise of temporary stewardship. But power, once tasted, rarely left without blood. And now, with Michael back and the empire once again slipping from his grasp, Marcus needed leverage. He found it in Ivy. Or rather, he created it. It started with a document. A file Ivy never touched, never saw, yet it sat on her office computer with her digital signature and login timestamp. An internal report on a potential merger with a rival firm, one that suddenly leaked. Then came the emails, fabricated chains between Ivy and a fictitious contact at that very competitor. The messages were short, transactional, and damning. Screenshots were printed and circulated among select board members before she ever saw them. Marcus moved with precision. He hired a third-party tech auditor who discovered irregular access from Ivy's employee ID to confidential files. Even her keycard history had been altered to show late-night entries into restricted floors. The setup was flawless, because it wasn't about proving guilt. It was about planting doubt, in the board, in the staff, and most of all, in Michael. Ivy never saw it coming. She arrived one morning to find her badge deactivated and her desk sealed. Security escorted her to a private conference room where HR representatives sat like statues behind a folder filled with evidence. Michael wasn't there, and that hurt more than the accusations. They read the charges. Internal breach, data leakage, corporate misconduct. Ivy listened in stunned silence, her throat tight, her heart beating loud in her ears. "This isn't real," she said quietly. "I didn't do any of this." The HR manager gave her a rehearsed nod. "We're following standard protocol. The investigation is ongoing, but at this time, we're forced to terminate your position effective immediately." Ivy stood. "I want to speak to Michael. He's been placed on temporary leave pending board review," the woman replied. "Mr. Marcus Caldwell is acting CEO." Of course he is, Ivy thought, rage igniting beneath the disbelief. They escorted her to the lobby. No one made eye contact. No one said goodbye. Michael found her later that night. She was sitting on the steps outside the warehouse she used to call home, the one she hadn't visited in weeks. The streetlights buzzed above her, and in her lap lay the termination letter she couldn't bring herself to tear. He sat beside her in silence. "I trusted you," she said, eyes locked on the pavement. Michael didn't flinch. "And I trusted them." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw what the board hadn't, a man unraveling behind the mask of control. "I never doubted you," he added softly. "Not for a second." "Then why didn't you fight for me?" His voice cracked. "Because the moment I did, they turned on me too, said I was compromised, that I let personal bias cloud my judgment. So they took everything from both of us." He nodded. "Marcus orchestrated it. I know it, but I have no proof." Ivy clenched her jaw. "Then I'll find it." Michael turned to her. "Ivy, you don't owe me—" "I'm not doing it for you," she interrupted. "I'm doing it because I won't let someone like Marcus write the ending of my story." The fire in her eyes was no longer the girl sorting bottles in the cold. It was a woman who had lost enough to stop fearing anything. In the days that followed, Ivy worked in the shadows. She reached out to Mara, a quiet but brilliant IT analyst who had always admired her calm under pressure. Mara agreed to help covertly. Together, they sifted through security footage, access logs, system backups. Every file that was supposedly tied to Ivy had traces, too clean, too consistent. No human moves that perfectly. They found inconsistencies in the keycard logs. Ivy's badge scanned into a restricted server room at 2:13 a.m. The same night her GPS data showed her phone 2 miles away. Then came the breakthrough. Mara traced the falsified emails back to a dormant server within Caldwell's internal system, one that Marcus had full administrative access to. Buried inside was an archive of forged documents, predated and ready to be deployed against more than just Ivy. He had planned a quiet takeover, and she had been the easiest pawn to sacrifice. Ivy stood outside the office building again. She wasn't there for a job, or for forgiveness. She was there for justice. She sent the evidence to the board, to Michael, and anonymously to the media. She didn't wait for permission. She kicked the hornet's nest wide open. Within 24 hours, chaos broke loose inside Caldwell International. Marcus denied everything. Then the files went public. And the truth, slow, bitter, and undeniable, began to rise. Michael found her again, this time in a quiet cafe she'd begun working at part-time while putting her life back together. He didn't say a word. He simply handed her a folder. Inside, a formal apology from the board, a reinstatement letter and a check with more zeros than she had ever seen. She pushed it back across the table. "I don't want your money," she said. Michael looked at her, pain and pride tangled in his eyes. "Then what do you want?" Ivy hesitated, her voice low. "I don't know yet, but when I do, I'll let myself choose." And she walked away. But behind her, Michael whispered, "I hope I'm still someone worth choosing." The air inside the warehouse was thick with dust and silence, the kind of silence that didn't soothe but suffocated. Ivy sat on the concrete floor, her wrists bound behind her with a plastic tie, ankles aching from where they had been dragged across the gravel. She had known Marcus was dangerous, but she hadn't expected this. What began as a simple meeting to clear things up had turned into a trap. He had sent a car. It was black, tinted, secure. She hadn't realized the driver didn't work for Caldwell International until it was too late. Her phone was taken. Her voice had no audience, and the man who once dined in boardrooms now towered above her like a dictator protecting a throne made of lies. "You should have disappeared quietly," Marcus hissed, pacing before her like a man unraveling at the seams. "But no, you just had to dig." Ivy met his gaze, defiant even through the fear in her bones. "You framed me. You stole everything." He smiled coldly. "I protected what was mine." "You mean what was Michael's?" she snapped. The name alone twisted something in him. Michael was always the golden boy, the beloved, the heir. And you, he sneered. You're the girl from the gutter who made him forget who he was. You mean who he is, she shot back. Marcus knelt in front of her, his eyes gleaming with the kind of fury that came from years of being second best. I gave him back his name. You gave him weakness. Ivy's voice trembled, but her words didn't. No, I gave him heart, something you'll never understand. Miles away, Michael sat in his car, staring at the glowing screen of his phone. Mara's voice came through, panicked and fast. I tracked her phone to the edge of the docks, she said. Signal went dead an hour ago. She never made it to the police. Michael's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Marcus? He asked. Yes, Mara confirmed. And Michael? I think he's desperate. That was all Michael needed to hear. He didn't bring security. He didn't call the police. He went alone. The warehouse sat near the old rail yard, surrounded by rusted fences and broken light posts. He parked in the shadows and moved quickly, quietly, heart pounding louder than his footsteps. Inside, the darkness swallowed him, but he heard her before he saw her, a sharp intake of breath, followed by Marcus's voice, low and venomous. Michael stepped into the light. Let her go. Marcus turned slowly, caught between surprise and satisfaction. Ah, the prodigal brother arrives. Ivy's eyes widened. Michael, no. Marcus drew a knife from his coat pocket, holding it low but visible. Always dramatic. You could have stayed gone, you know. Lived in luxury. Let me have what I built while you wandered around with your little charity project. Michael took a step closer. I don't care about the company. No? Marcus tilted his head. Then why are you here? Michael's voice broke as he looked at Ivy. Because she's everything I forgot I needed. Marcus laughed. You'd throw everything away for her? I already did, Michael said, and I'd do it again. Then he moved. Marcus lunged, but Michael was faster. He threw himself in front of Ivy just as the blade swung forward. A sharp pain tore through his side, a burn that spread fast and deep, but he didn't stop moving. He tackled Marcus to the ground, the knife clattering against the concrete. Blood seeped through his shirt, staining it dark. Ivy screamed his name, struggling against the ties, her voice raw with panic. Marcus groaned beneath him, stunned by the impact. But Michael didn't let up, not until footsteps thundered into the room. Police. Flashing lights flooded the warehouse. Officers shouted. Guns were drawn. Within seconds, Marcus was dragged off the floor in handcuffs, swearing through bloodied lips. Michael collapsed beside Ivy. She didn't hesitate. Crawling on her knees, she held his face in her trembling hands. You idiot, she whispered. You could have died. He smiled, teeth clenched in pain. Still worth it. She let out a half laugh, half sob, then pulled out the pocket knife one of the officers handed her and cut his bindings. Then hers. Stay with me, she whispered. Don't you dare fade now. Michael's hand found hers. I'm not going anywhere. Paramedics swarmed them, voices urgent, hands lifting, light stabbing into the dark. Before they placed him on the stretcher, Michael turned to her one last time. I don't know what tomorrow brings, he said, but I know this. You're the only thing I've ever been sure of. And then he was gone, wheeled into the night, sirens rising like a chorus behind him. Marcus was arrested, charged with fraud, attempted murder, corporate conspiracy. The board severed all ties, media swarmed, statements were issued. Caldwell International began to rebuild its reputation on a foundation scorched by betrayal. But Ivy, she stayed quiet. She didn't seek cameras or vindication, only peace. The next morning, Ivy sat in a hospital hallway, fingers knotted in her lap, staring at the sterile floor tiles that never seemed to end. A nurse approached. He's awake. Ivy stood but didn't move. He asked for you, the nurse added. Something in her cracked. She walked slowly toward the door, unsure what she'd find. Michael lay in bed, pale but alive, a bandage across his side, his eyes heavy but steady. When he saw her, his breath caught. Ivy. She sat beside him, took his hand, and for a long time neither of them said a word. There was nothing to explain anymore. No lies left to untangle, just truth. and the kind of silence that finally felt safe. The sky over New Camden was an impossible blue that morning, too serene for a city that had witnessed so much noise. But inside the tallest building in the skyline, anticipation buzzed like electricity through the halls. Caldwell Tower. Reporters gathered in rows, their cameras pointed toward the podium centered beneath the company's emblem, a phoenix cast in steel, gleaming above the heads of shareholders, employees, and media giants. Michael Caldwell stepped into the light wearing no tie, no pretense, just a dark blazer over a white shirt, sleeves rolled at the cuffs, a single scar peeking out from beneath the fabric, a reminder of the night everything changed. His eyes scanned the room once, then settled on the cameras. "I'll be brief," he began, voice calm but resolute. "I've spent most of my life believing power was the same as purpose. That success could be measured in numbers, titles, towers, but sometimes the world breaks us in order to teach us who we really are." A hush fell. "I disappeared for nearly 3 months. You all know that. What most of you don't know is, during that time I lost everything I used to cling to. My name, my memory, my influence. And instead of boardrooms, I woke up in an alley." People shifted in their seats, phones stilled, mouths parted slightly. "I was found by someone who had nothing," he continued, "and yet gave me everything." Michael's voice faltered for just a second. He cleared his throat gently. "She didn't know who I was, didn't care. She saw a man on the ground and offered him dignity, food, shelter, silence. And when I remembered who I was, I forgot to tell her how much she meant. I walked away thinking I was protecting her, but the truth is, I was running from a version of myself I hadn't learned to love yet." Now every camera was fixed, every reporter frozen. Michael glanced down at the notes he didn't need, then back at the crowd. "I've been a CEO, I've been a survivor, but for the first time, I'd like to be something more. Something human." He paused, then took a breath, the kind that tasted like freedom. "So today I'm stepping down as CEO of Caldwell International." Gasps rose around the room. "I'm leaving this tower because I've finally realized I don't want to build an empire without knowing who I am when I'm not sitting at the top of it." Silence stretched. Then, softly at first, came applause, then louder and louder. Not for the company, not for the brand, but for the man who had dared to walk away from the world that once defined him. Hours later, Michael walked through a quiet neighborhood lined with bookstores, bakeries, and small cafes. He wore no security detail, no suit. Just a quiet smile and something clenched gently in his hand. The corner cafe sat on a cobblestone path, sunlight spilling over its awning like it had been waiting for him. A wooden sign hung from the window. "La Brisa. Breathe and begin." He pushed the door open, the soft chime above announcing his arrival. It smelled of cinnamon and something floral. Fresh paint still lingered in the air. A bookshelf stood near the counter, filled with used novels and poetry collections, and behind the counter stood Ivy. Hair tied back loosely, apron dusted with flour, sleeves rolled up. She looked like every version of home he'd ever lost and finally found again. She didn't speak. Neither did he. He walked slowly to the counter and placed a small velvet box between them, then opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet, thin and elegant, with a tiny engraving on the inner side. "With you, always." Ivy blinked once, then again. Her voice came out quieter than she expected. "You left everything." He nodded. "Because I realized none of it mattered without you." Her fingers brushed the edge of the bracelet. "You didn't need to give it all up." "I did," he said, "because I want to give something real. Not positions or promises, just presence." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she stepped out from behind the counter. For a moment, they just stood there, inches apart, surrounded by the scent of fresh coffee and unspoken memories. Then she reached for the bracelet, slid it onto her wrist and whispered, "I understand now." Michael tilted his head. "Understand what?" "That love isn't about saving someone," she said. "It's about staying, even when the world tries to pull you back into who you used to be." He took her hand gently in his. "I'm staying." She nodded, but neither of them said, "I love you." They didn't need to. It was there, in the silence, in the bracelet, in the way she leaned into his chest as if she had finally found a place to rest. Outside, the city moved on. Traffic, noise, ambition. But inside that cafe, two hearts beat in rhythm for the first time in a long time. And as Ivy closed her eyes, she understood what Michael had really given her. Not just freedom, not just truth, but a man who chose her, and not in the dark, not in secret, but in the light of day. The sun was just beginning to melt over the rooftops of New Camden when Ivy stepped out onto the cafe's wooden veranda, a cup of tea in her hands and the scent of warm cinnamon clinging to her sleeves. The city behind her was alive. Voices, footsteps, the soft grind of wheels over cobblestones. But here, in her small corner of the world, there was peace. Old books lined the shelves near the entrance. Recipes scrawled in blue ink curled slightly on the bulletin board. The little cafe had become a reflection of her, messy in places, beautiful in its imperfections, and filled with things that made people feel less alone. Michael sat at a table near the edge, facing the fading sky. He hadn't said much when he arrived that afternoon, just smiled quietly, as if asking permission to stay, and she had nodded. Now Ivy moved toward him, her heart calm and wild all at once. She placed the tea in front of him and sat opposite, their knees brushing under the small table. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to fill the space with explanations anymore. The silence between them had changed, no longer a wall, but a bridge. Michael took a slow sip of tea, then looked up at her. "I never imagined coming back to you like this." She tilted her head. "How did you imagine it?" "I didn't," he said softly. "I thought I'd ruined every path back." Ivy traced the rim of her own cup with her finger. "You left without a word. You came back with the whole world watching." He nodded. "And yet this is the only moment that feels real." She met his eyes, and this time there was no mask behind them, no title, no guarded edge, just Michael, just the man who had slept on her floor, kissed her beneath broken rooftops, bled for her in the dark, and something inside her unclenched. "I was angry," she said. "Still am, a little." "I know, but I missed you more than I hated you." Michael leaned forward, his voice raw. "Ivy, I'm sorry for leaving, for not explaining, for all the things I should have said and didn't. I thought I was protecting you, but the truth is, I was protecting myself from needing you." Tears threatened the corner of her eyes, but she blinked them away. He went on. "I've had everything money can buy, but I've never been richer than when I was beside you in that shack, drinking tea from a chipped mug and watching you read by candlelight." Ivy let those words sit. Then she whispered, "You didn't need to be perfect." Michael's breath caught. She reached for his hand, warm, calloused, familiar. "You just needed to be honest." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the weight of those words settled something inside him. Then slowly he stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair like a man asking not for a future, but for forgiveness. She didn't wait. She pulled him into her arms. The embrace was quiet, long, trembling, not a reunion of passion, but of recognition, of two souls choosing, not finding their way back to one another. He held her tightly, forehead pressed to hers. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not anymore." And then, with no audience, no stage, no shadows, he kissed her. It was gentle, deep, a touch of lips that said we survived. When they pulled apart, Ivy laughed, a soft, cracked laugh full of something new. Hope. "You know," she murmured, "this doesn't mean everything's fixed." "I know," he replied, his smile crooked. "But it means we're not broken." She nodded. They sat back down, side by side now. The wind picked up, rustling the handwritten menus on the table. Michael looked out toward the street, watching strangers pass with their lives in motion. "I've been offered positions in 3 cities this week," he said. Ivy turned to him. "And?" "I told them I had other plans." She raised an eyebrow. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a key, small, worn, with a faded red tag that read, "Storage 4." "I kept the shack," he said. "Had it cleaned up, fixed the roof." She stared at him, eyes wide. "Not because I planned to live there," he added with a laugh, "but because I wanted to remember where I became human." Ivy took the key, her thumb brushing over the tag. "I don't know what comes next," she said. He nodded. "Me neither. But I know this," she added. turning to him again. "I don't want to figure it out alone." His smile deepened. They sat there until the sky went purple and the lights inside the cafe cast golden halos on the glass. Customers came and went. The world moved. But Ivy and Michael remained, not as a billionaire and a girl from the street, not as a CEO and his former assistant, but as two people who had found something rare. Love not built on fantasy, but chosen in truth. And in the quiet hum of that evening, Ivy reached for his hand again and whispered, "This isn't a happy ending." Michael kissed the top of her head. "No," he said, "it's a beginning." The morning air carried the scent of rosemary bread and fresh coffee as Ivy opened the cafe's windows, letting the golden light of early day spill across the floorboards. She had come to cherish this routine, the stillness before the rush, the hum of water boiling, the rhythm of a new life she never thought she'd have. Michael was in the back, arranging deliveries, sleeves rolled up, shirt dusted with flour. He had adapted to the cafe life in a way that made Ivy laugh, the former CEO now comfortable measuring cinnamon and fixing jam labels. No press, no assistance, just his quiet presence beside her. And still, even with peace returning and love reclaimed, there was a piece missing. Aaron. The boy she had raised like a son, her little brother, her lost half. Ivy didn't talk about him often, but Michael had seen the way her gaze lingered on old letters, the way her hands trembled when she sorted through the few photographs she kept in a box behind the counter. And so, one evening, without saying a word, he began to search. He hired no investigators. He went himself. Shelter by shelter, he followed the fading paper trail. A foster placement here, a group home there, a missing record, a changed name. It was like trying to catch wind with his hands. But he didn't stop. He knew what Ivy had never said aloud. Her heart hadn't healed because part of it was still waiting. Then, in a small shelter on the edge of the city, Michael found him. Aaron, 15 years old, thin, quiet, mistrustful. The boy's eyes were sharp, older than his age, shaped by a world that had never been gentle. Michael introduced himself carefully, said he knew Ivy, said she never stopped writing. Aaron didn't believe him, until Michael pulled out one of the notes Ivy had written over the years, a small weathered scrap of paper. On it, Ivy's handwriting, "No matter where you are, I'll find you. You are not forgotten." Aaron stared at the note for a long time. Then, almost imperceptibly, he whispered, "She really wrote that?" Michael nodded. "She never stopped believing you'd come back." Aaron didn't speak again, but he took the note and folded it carefully, like a secret he couldn't let go. 2 mornings later, Ivy stood behind the counter as sunlight danced through the glass door. She was arranging books near the pastry display when the bell above the entrance chimed. She glanced up casually and froze. There in the doorway stood a boy, lean frame, dark curls, eyes that mirrored her own. His clothes were worn, his shoes too small, and in his hand he held one of her notes, crumpled, faded, but unmistakably hers. "I think," he said, his voice shaky but brave, "this belongs to you." Ivy's hands flew to her mouth. "Aaron?" she breathed. He nodded once, and then her legs gave in. She ran, faster than she'd moved in years, around the counter, across the floor, straight into his arms. She wrapped him in the kind of hug that comes not from relief, but from resurrection. He stood still for a second, tense, then melted. His head dropped to her shoulder, and his arms clung to her back with the grip of a child who had waited too long. "You took your time," he whispered against her hair. "I never stopped looking," she sobbed. And there in the middle of her cafe, Ivy cried like she had never cried, not for loss, but for everything that had returned. Michael stood at the doorway, watching in silence. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak, just smiled, because this moment wasn't about him. It was about the girl who had found him in the trash, and the boy she had never stopped waiting for. Later that evening, the cafe remained open just a little longer. The lights were soft, the room quiet. Aaron sat at the corner table with a plate of pastries in front of him, watching Ivy as she fussed over nothing just to keep moving. He didn't say much, but his eyes followed her with the fragile attention of someone finally safe. Michael leaned down beside him and passed a napkin. "She makes too much food when she's nervous," he said with a grin. Aaron smirked. "She talks a lot too." Michael chuckled. "She's been waiting a long time to say everything at once." "I can tell." They didn't speak for a moment. Then Aaron asked quietly, "Are you her boyfriend or something?" Michael smiled. "Something like that." "Are you going to leave?" The question caught Michael off guard. He looked at the boy, really looked, and answered truthfully. "No?" Aaron nodded slowly. That was enough. A week later, Ivy hung a new photo on the cafe's main wall, just above the bookshelf, framed in dark walnut. The picture showed the three of them on the back porch, Ivy in her apron, Michael in flower-streaked sleeves, Aaron in a new hoodie too big for him but worn like armor. They were laughing, arms intertwined, eyes tired but whole. Beneath the photo, a plaque read, "Family is what always finds its way back, even after everything." Every morning, Ivy passed that photo, and every morning she smiled, not because her story was perfect, but because somehow, against all odds, love had chosen to stay. And family, says, had finally come home. They didn't need extravagant promises or perfect endings. The love they chose to build was made of pauses, reconciliations, and a whispered yes after many "I don't know." In the end, Ivy and Michael discovered that home isn't a place you arrive at. It's someone who walks beside you when you decide to stop running. And sometimes, the happy ending isn't a fresh start in another country, but the silent peace of two hearts that finally decided to stay. And you, have you allowed yourself to love without needing to be saved? If this story touched you in any way, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your presence here makes all the difference. It's what keeps this flame alive.